Thank you so much for taking the time to be here tonight. It turns out the four panelists we've invited to this event actually all know each other and work together, but I think at different periods of time you all didn't quite align and at the same place. Is that right? Okay. I think Matt worked with everyone though, because it was at Penn.
Yep, I know all three of these characters.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Matt, since you're off mute, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your practice. What's going on at Penn these days?
Yeah, well, so our a lot of the projects that we work on, I should start by saying are, focused on improving the way we deliver care at Penn Medicine. And what that means is a lot of our work is just aligned with health system operations. Um, and so there are folks on our team who do more formal academic research as well. And so our kind of team is mixed up, a mixed bag of kind of folks who are doing kind of thought leadership, academic research, and folks who are kind of on the business side of the health system, improving day-to-day operations. Um, a lot of our work, I'd say, kind of falls into a couple of categories. One is about moving care into the home and into the lives of patients. And so, I think we know that when patients come to see us in a brick and mortar clinic, that's a small sliver of their life. And with people who have a lot of complex care needs, compounded by complex social needs, we know that the best way to keep them healthy is we need to find ways to engage with them outside of those kind of in-person touch points. And so this idea of automated hovering, connected health, um, just being able to kind of keep engagement with patients and know how they're doing outside of those clinic visits is a big part of our work. Another piece is around just improving the the value of our care team and what they're actually spending their time on, and so finding opportunities to automate certain types of tasks that are that are less of the art and more of the science, things that are logic based, and really can feel like a burden administrative type task for our providers. Being able to kind of just automate away um, a lot of that work that isn't about directly providing care. Um, so those are two of the big buckets that we work on. This bringing care into people's homes, into their lives, automation and improving just workforce efficiency and experience. And then population health management is related to the first one, but how do we kind of better manage different populations? And that's everything from monitoring things like blood pressure for folks who we know have a diagnosis of hypertension, um, as well as things like preventative health screenings when we know certain people are going to benefit from, I think the most common ones are mammographies for breast cancer screening or colonoscopies for colon cancer screening, being able to find those folks who otherwise might slip through the cracks and kind of nudge them um, to actually follow through with that kind of screening. So that's kind of a broad brushstroke of types of things that we work on.
I think I'd love to get into eventually kind of how you crack into that and the types of skills you use to solve those problems. But I think it might make sense when I think of UX and healthcare, I think of Matt, your scenario, right? In hospitals, in healthcare facilities. We've got two folks on the call who actually work on the flip side of the equation. So Remi, I'm going to turn it to you and ask you a similar question, which is, what is it like for you? What are you working on, and explain what the other side of the house is?
Yeah, it's funny because as Matt was talking, I was like, oh, wow, that sounds exactly like the things we think about. Because so I work specifically at a health insurance company called AmeriHealthcaritas, and we deal mostly with Medicare and Medicaid patients. So we have a very particular population that we're dealing with. And a lot of times they have so many other things going on in their lives that their health insurance is the last thing they want to think about. They're thinking about how to get food on the table for their kids, or how to get their kids to school and also get to their doctor's appointments, or maybe their 2 part-time jobs that they have. So they're juggling a lot of stuff. So we also are thinking about how we can connect with them as a health insurance provider outside of them paying their bills and doing all of the basic things, looking at their claims, making sure their doctors are in network. There's all of these kind of basic problems, but then we're now starting to take a look at those deeper problems. So the team that I'm a part of, we're pretty new in the organization. We're about a year old. So we've not done much of that yet, but this is kind of what we're thinking about, is how do we connect to them? Do we give them resources in our app to help them with other things in their lives? That kind of thing. And then as well, we're thinking about how to change operational efficiencies on our side with our own internal associates, because ultimately, if our associates who are doing the job are stressed out, then they're not going to be able to provide a good service to our members. So we want to make sure that our internal organization is kind of running as smoothly and as most efficiently as it can in order to provide the best service to our members, as well as the physicians who we work with.
I'd like to switch to Franki, and if I remember correctly, you're consulting for the VA, and so that's even kind of another angle on healthcare, and correct me if I have that wrong.
No. So that is correct. And the angle we go from is focusing on a specific population, but very similar to kind of what Remi was saying within that population, not only trying their needs, barriers, wants, limitations, etc. We are also trying to view it from a perspective of policy and making recommendations that are based on the research, but then putting forth the most effective pitch, for lack of a better word, to either, the powers that be that make the policy, or the powers that be that enforce the policy, et cetera, in order to benefit that population down the line. So then it becomes even more than, what are the other competing priorities? Can they receive their healthcare? What kind of healthcare are they receiving? What is the quality of that healthcare? It is also like, how long will it take to get there? What are your quick wins and your like long-term goals, but from like an even higher level, where you have to think of how they are balancing it amongst other priorities that are not healthcare. And when I say they, I mean like the people who are providing for providers, providing for insurance companies, providing higher and higher up. So every level you have to figure out what they are trying to get done and what they are competing with to get it done in a timely fashion, and how timely to, the government is not always timely to, or immediate to the person that needs those benefits in real time. So I work with veterans. And so we are currently doing research on issues that have happened over the last, sometimes 50 years, depending on when they served. And it's really interesting to see how, non-immediate some of these interventions have to be over time. Yeah.
Okay. And by way of introduction, I'd like to ask Mike the same question, but maybe a little bit of a twist, which is what types of stuff have you worked on in the past and continue to work on today?
Yeah, so when I worked at Center for Healthcare Innovation at Penn Medicine, we worked on the provider side. And I can tell you our contact with patients, we were very close to patients, our involvement with discovery phase research and testing. I think access is just an incredible advantage when working for an awesome spot like the Center for Healthcare Innovation. I'm now working for a company called EPAM Continuum. We're an innovation and design consultation firm. So we're not a healthcare company per se, but our clients are healthcare companies. To kind of riff off some of the different kinds of companies that EPAM Continuum consults, it's everything from, yes, there's payers, there's providers, but there's also pharmaceutical companies, and there's also these kind of new commercial entrants, which I think we've seen an uptick in the past 4 years. Without naming any names, you can do a quick search for various different household retail pharmacy company names that are trying to get a seat at the table. when it comes to providing healthcare and being top of mind when something goes wrong. It's an interesting approach, and it's interesting to see this kind of paradigm shift with some of these companies wanting to move into that space. I'll let you draw your own conclusions on how successful they are. You can do a quick Google search on some of the approaches, but it's interesting to see many of these commercial companies try to get into the not necessarily health. They do provide healthcare sometimes, but they want to be top of mind when patients, how they manage their medications, how they manage their symptoms, how they find doctors, and how they approach their wearable devices.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to do a quick plug for the Slido. So I did just post the link to the Slido. We do have some questions rolling in. I'm going to read through as they come in and pop them in if they make sense to fit in. Otherwise, we'll leave some time at the end for those questions. But I'd actually like to dig into like what skill sets, right? So Franki started to introduce some of the complexity of serving, various stakeholders that extend on up. I'd love to talk about like what skill sets in UX are you utilizing? Service design, is it other things, but what becomes important in this ecosystem?
Are you asking everyone, Lauren, or
Sorry, I didn't serve that up very well, but Franki, let's start with you.
No, yeah. So I currently work for the VA, but I think a really good summary contract client that I worked for was Medicaid, Medicare, and it was a research-based project in specifically substance use and the resources that are provided to individuals who use substance for their healthcare that are not necessarily recovery correlated, but are still needed for anybody to maintain their well-being. And so not only are we, interacting with the research participants, the people that are telling us about what they are looking for in those services, we then are delivering to the client who has their own biases and their own ideas of what they thought they would have to provide or wanted to provide or could provide. And then they get from the people that we are researching, and then they have then, okay, we didn't know that they were going to need X, Y, and Z. How much will it take X, Y, and Z to get covered by at least Medicaid, Medicare at the time? And then we then provide a lot of what we provided to them was kind of like talking points by evaluating the people that they told us were above them that they needed to report to. So sometimes not even being in the room, you have to anticipate what is being fed to you in terms of like what the what the financial side is going to be, what the political side is going to be. Something that was very interesting to me is I was working on that client contract during the turn of the administration, and between one and another, the research demand for that particular project kind of dried up, and the client, turned toward a different set of priorities that had been delivered to them by the new administration. So these skills where I started in with everybody else here on the call, which was like very much boots on the ground. How is the patient interacting with the provider? How is the provider, delivering care? It is now ballooned into how do you provide resource up to do a trickle down effect, which again works in some areas and sometimes doesn't feel like it works in others, but it is this very weird back and forth anticipatory roadmap where you then have to consider who gets the immediate help and who will be strategized for more than anything for the future. And I think that is the biggest thing that I now do, is more like visualizing the possibilities depending on which direction we go in, rather than direct service or direct product design like I used to do, which has been very interesting as a pivot for sure.
I'll kind of open it up to the other three panelists here, but are there other skills you would add to that as things that you practice regularly?
I have one. Matt, you mentioned as an undergrad graphic design. I'm also an graduate in graphic design. I can't tell you how important visual design is in slide presentations and visual storytelling. I don't know why. I could have said many of other things, but that was one that came to mind.
I can confirm that as somebody who doesn't have a visual design background and always shied away from it in UX. I mean, Mike knows he was one of my professors at grad school. Lauren knows she was also one of my professors in grad school. I'm not a visual designer, and it definitely comes into play sometimes. So I will confirm that with Mike. I'd say in my day-to-day job, one of the biggest things that is most important is being able to communicate the needs of your users really well, and the why does this work matter? So as a leader of a team at my job, I have to go to the leaders of our company and say, this is why you should give us money to do this research, to learn more about our members, for instance, and making those cases and being able to have the ability to like talk about why the work is important and what the outcomes will be. So that I think is really important in my current position. I'd say my team, it's a lot of UX research. It's a lot of human-centered design research. So that kind of thing, and just having empathy and being able to understand what people are going through based on what they tell you is really, really critical.
Research is really coming up as a theme here, and actually the question with the most votes at the moment, and yes, you can vote on which question might make it to the floor here in Slido. Healthcare like finance seems like a field with lots of red tape. How do you guys navigate designing around these limits? We're talking about research, we're talking about the people. Maybe we can start with Matt, but how does designing around the red tape look?
Yeah, I mean, I'll pile on maybe to the last few comments too, but relate it to this. Why is communication and visual design so important? And it's because healthcare, unlike many other places, I kind of always like to say it's a place where everybody can say no, but nobody can say yes. And so there's like many stakeholders who are involved with any decision making, who you have to kind of rally behind a project. And all of those stakeholders are there because healthcare is complex. And so being able to dive in and make sense of that complexity so that you can get alignment is super important to making change, any kind of change, I think, in a place like healthcare. And I think that relates to the last question, that you just posed to Lauren, which is like the bureaucracy and red tape. There are so many like governance structures, and like I said, just different stakeholders. There may be 10 different stakeholder groups you kind of have to manage in a given project. And it's not, you need all of them to be on board. And so that's true whether, a stakeholder is looking at it from a financial perspective, a legal risk perspective, a quality and safety perspective. All of those are lenses that you have to kind of anticipate and think about in a project. And I think with just experience, every project that you work on, you kind of learn ways, how do you put yourselves in the shoes of that stakeholder group? What is somebody in finance going to be thinking about when they're looking at a project versus somebody who's in quality and safety? And being able to communicate, anticipate those needs or concerns, or how the project kind of aligns with their goals, and being able to quickly communicate that so that you're kind of putting people's concerns, addressing their concerns, or building in how you're going to minimize risk into how you're running the project, whether that be doing design experiments, which we do a lot of the time, to actually test at a very small scale something that may seem risky, or doing it with a lot of guardrails in place, so that we can actually not just, not take no for an answer, but say, how can we do something? And that experimentation, I think, is one of the, aside from the, good communication skills and sense making, being able to follow, what is the scientific method that we've all learned in grade school. You need to form a hypothesis, design an experiment to test it, and you look at the results. And you're doing that not just to kind of validate your assumptions about the solution or the problem, but you're doing that to address any kind of concerns or risks that different stakeholders may perceive.
I think I'm going to flip that question to Remi as well, which is health insurance is also highly regulated in slightly different ways. But what does that regulation look like for you from a day-to-day perspective?
Yeah, so we are highly regulated because of the health insurance aspect, but then almost doubly highly regulated because of the Medicare, Medicaid aspect. So we contract with states individually and win those contracts on a, I don't know if it's the same amount of time every year. I'm thankfully not involved in the contracting side of things. I just have, they ask me for information and I give it to them. So I don't know how often it happens, but because of that, whenever we want to do anything, it not only has to go through our corporate teams, our corporate compliance teams, our corporate legal teams, our corporate branding team, because branding is separate from digital experience. It then has to go through all of those teams at whatever state level we are working with. So for instance, I'm just starting a project. We're just starting a project now about texting. We're switching to a new texting platform. And because of this, we're going to have to take all the messages that get sent out regularly. So you think it's similar to like, it's like, don't forget your flu shot kind of thing, or certain targeted ones for pregnancy or breast cancer screenings, colon cancer screenings, that kind of thing. Because we're focused on keeping our members healthy just as much as I think the hospitals and doctors are focused on keeping their patients healthy. But we're redoing all the text. So we have spreadsheets and spreadsheets of all of the different checks we have to do and making sure each one gets that sign off, because we can't be outside of regulations or we get fined. So it's really a lot of organizational work, which is really difficult for, I think, designers to think about. So my team, we always joke that like we're averse to spreadsheets and things like that, but we kind of have to lean into them just because we need to be organized to be able to go back to the states and say that we did get those sign-offs. So that's the big one.
Use the language of the folks. I'm gonna actually, Franki, I'm gonna pick up on what you put in the chat because we have a question related to that. How does policy work across state lines? Are you having to pitch multiple states? I'm not familiar. Is the VA different in NJ or PA in New York? So I wonder, Franki, if you could kind of dig into that a little bit.
Short answer, yes. And Remi hit on it with Medicaid, Medicare. There are, you know, as many people know, there's like federal and state different, a lot of the regulations are different state to state, not just for Medicaid, Medicare, but for other institutions, the VA being one of them. But a lot of healthcare in general, whether it's private or public, it really just depends on where you are and what you are able to do within those bounds. What was can you repeat the second part of the question again, Laura? Or the first?
I actually dismissed it, so I can't, but it was
okay, wonderful. Well, it really just, we often do research for larger generalized veteran populations. They do still look at different groupings of, you know, young veterans versus, you know, women versus trans versus Native American, Native peoples. And it really, in doing that research, we also have to capture how, you know, a Native person from Alaska is not going to be wanting or needing or able to receive the same thing as a Native person from Montana. And that all has to be distilled down into our reports and into our feedback, and then our recommendations as well. It's a lot of recommending collaboration that then you advise on of how best to collaborate. I will say that, like, when we were talking about communication, all of this, I feel like design is so much of these soft skills that you do not get taught in college, of like relationship building, trust building. We did a whole project in the VA of how do you build trust between veterans and the Veterans Affairs Office, because there is so much distrust between those two things. So in building policy, in doing research, in working with patients, providers, there are so many other skills too that you just kind of accumulate over time. And relationship building is the one I guess I wanted to highlight, of like to build a relationship with not just the people you're researching with, but then like the stakeholder in that space, and then the research, the policyholder, whoever it is in that space, so that they feel like you truly understand where they are, not just in this grand scheme, but in that specific context, is really important for moving a lot of policy recommendations, services, et cetera, is making sure that you are really instilling that confidence that you know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, and broken down by policies that stretch physical boundaries.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
incredible complexity. I'm going to pick up on the top question that's in the Slido. Mike, I'm actually going to pitch this question at you. Are there particular research methods that your organizations tend to use, prefer, or are more inclined to devote resources to? Methods to use in the future?
Yeah, I think the go-to is probably semi-structured interviews, sitting down with 12 participants, hopefully M users with lived experience, and just deeply investigating what their unmet needs are, what their challenges are. It's Lauren, as you know, it's the go-to method we teach students at Thomas Jefferson University. It's one of the go-to methods. But there's so many other methods that you can use. And again, research, it's not just discovery phase research, there's also research to validate. One of my favorites that I've used, and I picked it up at Penn Medicine. It was, Matt, I think we called it rapid validation tools. In other circles, it's called MVPs, prototyping. And I honestly, quite frankly, I don't get to use those techniques a lot currently in my current role. But those are game-changing techniques where you can take concepts with various risky assumptions and you can test them quickly. To me, it's the ultimate form of research, by taking an idea and testing it cheaply and quickly and really embracing this concept of fail fast. I can give you many examples of projects that would have benefited from that had they just test their concepts early. Instead, what I think a lot of companies are doing is building large wedding cake solutions and rolling them out in the market, and then nobody uses them and they wonder what happened. And that's the worst thing you can do, right? So my favorite if there's one thing that you should research that I can as a takeaway for you is look into rapid validation tools and prototyping.
I'd be curious. It feels very related to prototyping, but I know things changed due to COVID-19. So maybe Matt, we can start with you. I'd love to know kind of how did the beginning of COVID change the way you approached research and solution development? And then how did it change kind of coming out of COVID as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things changed. Earlier we talked about like the red tape and, resistance that you can hit and the different stakeholders you have to have engaged. And I think what COVID did that was a good thing was, for the first time in my experience was everybody had the same kind of mission, and so there was just like this alignment that you don't usually get with just having a shared goal, and whether that be we need to screen more folks more effectively, we need to give folks the vaccine more effectively and make sure we're reaching out to everybody, equally. We need to keep people out of the hospital and manage their symptoms at home. And so things moved really quickly because there was just so much alignment on what needed to get done, and there was an urgency to it. And so there was less of a need, I think, to design experiments to just, minimize perceived risk. I think there was, the risk of not doing anything outweighed the risk of doing something. And that was a pretty cool experience in a very, horrible circumstance, obviously. So I think that the other good thing was I think it just accelerated a lot of change where I think we were kind of dragging our feet as an industry. And so I remember starting out at Penn, 12 years ago, and the idea of being able to text patients was like, absurd for some reason. And I think, then we moved into, well, we can do that, but we have to, go through this lengthy consent process. And then, when COVID hit and we were, desperate to be able to reach people, and meet them in a way that's accessible to many, many different populations. I think like everybody was able to just wrap their heads around that. And I think that was some of those things that we were able to make a lot of headway on: simple texting to patients, telemedicine, um, uh, even having staff not be in the physical clinical setting if they don't need to, if they're doing like telehealth services. Um, all that stuff just, I felt like, got accelerated, where if we were kind of on the edge of kind of accepting that as the new status quo, kind of pushed us over that edge. I think unfortunately, like, things have regressed back to, the way they were for the most part, in terms of perceived risk, and how that, I think, just like, extends the time frame for change to truly take hold. But I don't think it's gone completely back to the way it was. And I think probably most importantly is that we have precedents now for a lot of things. And so we're able to move past these circular conversations around what's risky or what's not, especially when it comes to how we engage with patients, and kind of just have a more diverse kind of tool set on how to do that in a post-COVID world.
Absolutely. Build that trust of we've done this before. We're not going to break anything. It's okay. Franki, I'd like to ask you a similar question. What was the VA experience of COVID-19?
Well, I actually was at Penn while we kicked off COVID-19. My answer is I didn't know. But I can talk about the fallout because I was there at the new company. I started late 2021 and then doing real design into 2022. But I would say it was most of the same barriers in terms of communication and getting in contact with anybody. You had to think of new creative ways to do research and sampling, and you couldn't come into people's homes anymore. We still did site visits, very regulated ones. But I will say I think kind of different than Matt. It didn't go back to normal. I think COVID-19 did open up this new world to design research for government we still it might not be the same detail in our research as going in person, but with all those other red tape things in mind, with all the other barriers, there is a lot of good done in virtual interviewing, in virtual research, that we lean very heavily on now, that I see. Again, it's all up to interpretation of what is best or good enough or whatever you might have for the quality. But in terms of quick validation, quick response times, the amount of remote work that we now do in our research, with veterans, with providers, with anybody, has been invaluable. And we don't have to fly to Alaska, to California to do it. We call them up on a Wednesday afternoon, say, thank you so much for making time for us. Let's do a quick hour call. And you are able to saturate an entire Wednesday afternoon with way more people than you normally would have had you had to coordinate hotels and flights and et cetera. And what I hear was the pre-COVID arrangement. Again, you get a different quality, but it's had its own benefits to that as well.
I'll ask the same question of Remi, just to check in from a health insurance perspective. Did COVID make an impact on your work?
Well, I actually wasn't at this company during COVID. So I was at Jefferson when COVID started, and then I moved to a consultancy shortly after things calmed down and people were hiring again, before the emergency was over. But I can speak to how it changed everything in terms of that experience. I think both Matt and Frankie hit on a lot of it, which is one, like the idea, I want to go back to what Matt said of the idea of everyone being on the same page. I don't think I ever saw a project get pushed through more quickly than when I was working on the COVID chatbot at Jefferson. Something that I think in a normal timeline would have taken half a year, if not a year, if not more than that to get launched. We did in less than a week. It was many long days. I think I worked until like 11 p.m. midnight one night, but we knew it had to get done. So everyone was kind of on board and in agreement. So that was one thing. And then the virtual, I really want to echo what Frankie said about the virtual research. I think before that, I was like, oh, you have to sit with them. You have to be next to them and see what people are doing on their computer. And you have to see their space and see like what you have to look at everything around and be able to ask, what's that? What are you doing there? And while there is something great about that, there's also something really great about being able to talk to all of my associates who we may interview at work who live across the country, because we're a mostly remote company at this point. So that's one thing that our company did change, is that we went from we have a big, beautiful office building in Newtown Square, but it's deserted because everyone is remote now, and we stayed remote. But being able to talk to people from all over the place so easily and say, can you actually just share your screen so I can really see what you're doing instead of trying to look over your shoulder and take pictures. So in some ways, I think it has improved the research methods that I use all the time.
I want to pick up on what Aurelia just posted in the chat. There's a question related to it in the Slido as well, which is you can only reach participants virtually who have access to the text. So the question actually directed at Matt is, what challenges have you discovered working with different populations? Language, tech savviness, broadband access, does that limit you in any way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that I think every project, I think we try to think about every project, we take a fresh look and say, what are our learning objectives and how do we meet them? And I think you have to do your due diligence to know, what your population has access to before you kind of choose your approach. And so while I agree, like it's been really great to be able to just, jump on a video call with folks if you're trying to understand like workflows that are happening already on a computer. I also think like there's no substitute for being able to go and sit at someone's kitchen table with them and, look in their cabinets and their refrigerator. And if you're trying to understand like what their, behaviors around diet are. And so I think like always kind of, I always like to think like we have many tools in our toolbox, and the trick is to know which tool you use for what job.
That makes sense to me. I'm going to send a question Mike's way, and it's going to be a compilation of a couple different things. So there's a question around how easy is it to contact users or customers for interviews? There's also a question around, is the patient always the end user, or are there other users in mind? So it's kind of a twofold question, like how do we get these users and what kinds of users are you typically working with?
Yeah, so if you work for a company like EPAM Continuum, you do not have a direct access. So you would have to go through your client or whoever's you're working with, and they would have to kind of broker conversations and connect you with patients. And there's some extra steps that enable you to get there, but it is possible. The second question is a great one, and the answer is no. You're designing for not only patients, you're designing for providers. Sometimes you're designing for the caregiver. So for the husband or wife or parent, someone who's taking care of the patient. To talk about an underserved population, there's many unmet needs there. You could be designing for a pharmacist, or it could be anybody. It really depends on the project and the statement of work, and obviously the research that goes into it.
All right, there's a couple of topics I want to make sure we hit. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. We typically wrap up around 9 o'clock, and so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But I'd like to talk a little bit about AI And then I'd like to talk a little bit about, there's some questions around transitioning into the healthcare industry. I'd like to talk to Remi and Matt about kind of the job openings you have. So let's hit AI really quick, and then let's finish off with, I think there'll be lots of questions kind of around transitioning into UX and healthcare. So maybe I'll start with Remi. AI, how has that influenced or starting to percolate in the health insurance world?
It is just starting. So we have a small team who's thinking of use cases for AI, but because of all the regulations that we go through and the fact that we deal with so much patient data, it's not taking off. We can't even use it as employees. It's so they're very, very cautious about bringing AI to the table. So far, I think some of the most compelling use cases I've heard at my company are around like putting our contracts through a machine learning system to then understand them better and allow for associates like myself who need to understand the contracts in order to design things that fit within the contracts. But I don't understand all this legal speak, so I have to go and talk to our legal counsel to translate what it's saying. So is there a way that we could use AI to make that more accessible? So it's more those kind of internal things and less about taking any of our member data or finding trends through it or anything like that.
Mike, do you want to comment on the hacks toolkit that you just posted?
I hit enter too early. I meant to give it a description. So we're working on a lot of AI initiatives at EPAM Continuum. And AI has been around for a while. I think everyone, when people use the word AI, they're thinking of these large language models, ChatGPT, Midjourney, image generation. I think we're really early in this, and it doesn't surprise me to hear Remi companies, not wanting to use it. There are really significant problems with large language models. They hallucinate. I worked on a project where it was supposed to help students, and it was making up answers. And there's these interesting problems that come with generative AI from a data perspective. But there's also a really interesting thing happening, in my perspective, about the roles that designers will play. So we're going to be moving away, if AI continues and chat-based dialogue continues, we're going to move away from designing screens to designing chat dialogue. And there's some good sources out there. So one of them is the Hacks toolkit. This has been around for a while. So this has been around for, I think, like 5-6 years. And it's just kind of a list of do's and don'ts, best practices for creating chat-based AI experiences. And then another one that I would plug is Conversational Design Academy, which is a really thorough, I think there's a free trial you can check out, and it teaches you how to create really good conversation design, which I think is a skill that maybe we pick up a little bit, in design school, but there's a lot of material in there that was totally new to me. So just wanted to give those two a shout out.
Good plugs. I really like that point you made about moving away from designing interfaces to designing conversational or text output. That's something I'm facing in the financial services industry. So I'll open it up to Matt and Franki to say any other thoughts on AI before we move into kind of jobs.
I'll just say, I think a lot of people come to us and they think they need AI, and that's not really what they need. And I think we first seen this before things like Chat GPT with just text chat bots and things like that, and this desire to have really fluid, natural conversations using AI and things that but a lot of times these problems don't require that complex of a solution. And a lot of times I think what we do is we try to figure out, does this need that level of sophistication, or is this, logic based? Is it a simple, algorithm? And so I think that's one of the things I think I really enjoy about our work, is that we kind of we're problem centric. And so I think where it might be harder in a consultancy, if you're known for creating certain types of products or services, we kind of are able to, work with the folks that we partner with in projects throughout that problem definition phase. And so the solution set that we can take advantage of just becomes wider, and we can start to challenge, solutions where, something that maybe AI is what first comes to mind. That's not what we end up with at the end of the day. The other thing I'll say is while we're starting to have some projects that use AI for things like, we have a project right now around diabetic retinopathy. So screening folks who have diabetes, doing an eye test using a machine instead of having to go and get your eyes dilated and all of that, and then wait days or weeks for the results, and then get the results, and then have to make a follow-up appointment. We're using technology that takes a picture of the eye without dilation right in the clinic in about 5 minutes, and then uses AI to actually do the reading, the interpretation of that imaging. And so you're going from a process that has a whole bunch of friction and just time delay to getting something instantaneous. But I think there's a lot of legal risk that comes along with that. So this is one of our first use cases. And my hope is that we'll use this first use case as a way to, shorten up the conversations around legal risk or other types of risk in the future. I think the thing I've been most excited about is just seeing how our staff are using AI to just kind of supplement their work. So I have staff that are using AI to create visuals. They put in some data in a spreadsheet or something, and they're able to spit out these beautiful diagrams that never come out, ready to go from these systems. But it's like having people be able to start at from point A to Z. They're able to start at point, W instead of having to go through all those steps. So I think it's people using it for improving their just day-to-day work is where I actually see a lot more immediate value.
No, yeah, I only have one thing to add to Matt's, because I think so many designers fear that AI will replace us in different ways. I've had a lot of dialogue with other designers about, will AI synthesize for us? Will it produce insights? Will it create our pitch decks? Will it pitch for us? Like eventually, right? The cart runs away. But to keep in mind that AI is a tool, computers don't think, they compute. The same way that hammers hammer nails, but they need hands holding the handle. And as a designer, you are that hand. And if your hammer sucks, it's not the hammer that knows, it's the hand. And that's kind of what I've been trying to keep in mind, especially as we go forward with it, of it's just another tool. People freaked out about the printing press. People freaked out about the internet. We move forward, and AI is just one of those things. And I guess I say that because I know we're about to talk about jobs too. The only other thing I'll say is I'm sure you're all seeing everybody's looking for a unicorn, and often AI is a part of that unicorn description. I can't quell fear that they will. I can't say will they or will you not be hired based on what you know about AI. But if you are in that space as a designer and you do not know a lot about AI, that is okay, because you are not often being asked a lot about AI. You're often being asked, what does it need? What can we do? Where should we push it? And then a computer scientist will do the coding, but you are doing the human part. And you will always be doing the human part, because a computer just can't. It never will. Anyway, that's the only thing I'd add to what Matt said.
I want to pick up on that and something that Matt said too, which is reducing friction. Before we talk about the skills needed to be successful, I'd love to talk about what is success? What is good design in healthcare look like? And just because I like putting him on the spot, let's start with Mike. What do you think good looks like? What is good?
Impact.
Impact.
It
Okay.
moved the needle. It made patients' lives better. It really actually, I still believe it doesn't matter what the solution is. I think it really is all about, did you move the needle on the problem to be solved? Did you, for the patient, for the provider? To me, that's the highest order of design.
Okay, I'll open it up. Anyone, anything to add to what is good?
I
I'll go.
think Mike hit it on the head. There are many ways that I could say the same thing that Mike said in many more words, because I talk a lot, but it's the impact. It's, did we solve the problem we were trying to solve, and how well did we do it? Did we make someone's life easier?
It's not always loud, though. I will say that, like, the signal of it was good is not a blaring horn. It was bad is a blaring horn. People will tell you that. It was good can be a lot more nuanced. So just keep an eye on, yeah, the needle more than maybe a flashing red light.
But some of the best solutions to this day, and Matt, hopefully this will make you smile. The most impactful solutions I made used SMS texting. It didn't use a website. It didn't use a native application. It didn't use generative AI. It used texting with very basic artificial intelligence, and it worked. And one of the biggest challenges that I'm facing right now is in developing native applications is getting people to download the application. It's really hard. From a portfolio standpoint, I think being able to tell your story about impact is something that I tell my students all the time. It's not just about awesome screens and the research that you did and the insights. That's great. That's all important. But being able to state what the impact was, or at least state what your projected impact is, I think, in my view, resonates with great hiring managers.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I was gonna say, similar to Mike, one of the best solutions I had ever seen was when I was at Jefferson, and it was literally changing the color of a piece of paper. It was a colored sheet of paper for tests that were urgent. So in OB-GYN, there were certain tests that needed to be done urgently. And instead of having the normal white paper, those tests came with a bright pink paper. So then when it got into the lab and they saw that pink paper immediately, they knew they had to grab that one first. So it required them to do no reading. I'm just catching up on the chat and the worry about the Zoom bombing. And it made such an impact that I actually met someone years later who worked in that department, and she was like, oh yeah, those pink papers were great. And that's when you know, like, it can be the simplest thing as long as it makes that impact and solves for what you want.
I'm going to pick up on the top question that's in the Slido, which is, where do you think designers can make a bigger impact in healthcare? A startup, hospital system, government, or corporate company? And whoever would like to jump in is welcome here.
I think it's less about where you can make the bigger impact and more about where you can make an impact related to what type of impact you want to make.
No, I was just going to say the same thing, Remi. Like, there are so many benefits and cons on both sides. Like, I deeply miss working with patients and providers. I deeply miss that instantaneous feedback you get from being inside, like, the system, like the system you are designing for. However, I have come to find that my small push up top does do something. Like the butterfly effect does eventually create a hurricane somewhere, maybe. I just won't see it, maybe. So it really depends on what you want to do. Do you want to do something right now, or do you want to contribute to something later, possibly, and be okay with that?
Let's actually talk about jobs. So Matt and Remi, I'd love to dig into. Remi, I know you're not posting until the beginning of next year, but Matt, what are you looking for? And we've got a question here related to folks who are transitioning from a non-healthcare industry. So looking for some advice and perspective on kind of what you're hiring for.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe I'll talk broadly about some of the roles that we have open. So first I'll say I think there's like a senior innovation manager role on there, and on our team we have two types of like project lead roles. So people who are like leading the day-to-day nuts and bolts, hand in hand with clinicians and frontline staff on projects. And those are innovation managers and our design strategists. They have the same, and Mike and Frankie and Remi can all attest to this. They have the same scope of work. And, that is to lead projects from early problem definition to scaled impact, measurable impact at scale. And the only difference is that the design folks tend to have a design training and a design background. The innovation managers tend to have other types of backgrounds. The innovation manager can be more clear on that. Like some of them have more of a business background, project management, that kind of thing. The way I think about it is our designers tend to lean more towards divergent thinking, and our innovation managers more towards convergent thinking. But I think if you're a designer and you see an innovation manager job, you should feel free to apply to it because there is so much overlap between those roles, and the same goes the other way. I think, the other thing I'll say is our center has gotten really big since I first started 12 or so years ago. And so some of the postings that you see, I think there's a design strategist position that's open. As our team has grown, we've kind of formed these, what we call cores, which are smaller teams within the center that just have a specific area of focus or subject matter expertise. I think the one that's posted right now is for our Center for Health Justice. And so this is a newer team that's focused on, there's already a whole body of work that's come before this team has joined our center. A lot of that was grant-funded, research-based work. And so they're kind of breaking into taking those same principles around health equity and health justice and applying them to the way we deliver care at Penn Medicine. So if you see postings, on our Work With Us page or anything like that, you might want to look for those specific types of groups. And the work can change slightly, I think, depending on which group you fall into. Along with that Center for Health Justice, there's our Nudge unit that focuses all on design for behavior change and behavioral economics. We have a couple of platform teams. So Way to Health is a technology platform that we've built at Penn Medicine that does a lot of that text message engagement, connected devices, and that kind of thing. And then the Insights to Outcomes team, formerly known as the Acceleration Lab, is the group that I primarily work with. That's the group that's fully funded by health system operations and the work, where the center kind of started, where everything we do is in partnership with health system employees, frontline staff.
I want to pick up on what's going on in the chat here, which is folks are asking for insights on researchers transitioning into healthcare, UX designers transitioning into healthcare. Any advice you might offer? And I'll open it up to kind of anyone here. Any advice you might offer to folks who'd like to break into healthcare?
I would say don't sell yourself short. I think like designers are problem solvers. And so I would urge you, if a lot of your work was around interface design specifically, for example, you've done so much more than that. You've understood problems and re-articulated them in a way that was helpful and that inspired your designs. And so I would encourage folks to maybe take a step back and think about their work as problem solving instead of something more technical. The other thing I would suggest is don't be afraid to apply to jobs that aren't design jobs. I actually think, a lot of places in healthcare don't have a center for healthcare innovation or a design group. And they're looking for people who can think creatively about problems. And so if you find any project manager jobs, program management jobs, even healthcare operations jobs, I would encourage you to apply to those, and let your creative problem solving stand out as something that, you know, isn't typically seen in those roles. And so I think it's worth taking the chance. You may be able to get a job that isn't technically a design job, but that you can bring your design skill set into.
Remi, I may pick up on, instead of asking you specifically what jobs you're hiring for next year, what are you looking for? What skills are you looking for? What makes an application stand out to you?
Yeah, for sure. I was actually, it's funny to your last question. I was thinking about it, and I recently interviewed someone for a contract role, who we ended up loving, who had no healthcare experience at all. But she came to us and was able to explain how she like pushed through barriers with her stakeholders, how she made users comfortable, how she examined the larger problem and kind of saw the forest for the trees in that way and things like that. So these skills that are so critical to healthcare that we talked about at the very beginning of this call, it happens in other industries. You just have to think about how you can talk about your work in a way that relates to healthcare. So that was something I was thinking of to add on to what Matt said there. In terms of what we're going to look for when we hopefully hire next year. So as I said, we're doing some contract stuff, but hopefully we're going to get some more full-time team members next year, and we are really looking across the board. We're not looking for unicorns per se, just because I don't believe, in my boss doesn't believe that a unicorn is necessarily the right thing to bring on. So we're looking for researchers, strategists, and then designers as well. So we also have a team that is devs. So we have the dev side covered. So we're really looking for those researchers, strategists, and then UI designers who can create those interfaces as well. So the whole gamut pretty much.
I'm
I
gonna
know
do,
that's not a fun answer, but
I'm gonna do a quick time check and say we are at the 9 o'clock hour. So if anyone does need to drop, we will record the rest of this session, and can join. But if our panelists can hang for a couple more minutes, I think we can kind of wrap up here. I did post the LinkedIn. I'm assuming you all don't mind. I put your LinkedIns in the chat. So if you do have a question for a specific panelist, I would encourage you all to follow them or connect with them on LinkedIn and ask that question directly. It might be a good opportunity to form a relationship with two people who have open roles coming up. One of the questions that and Matt, I think I might pick up on what you just posted in the chat. I think maybe this is a good kind of final question, maybe to close us out. But we hear feedback that folks are having trouble getting even through the first step in the application process, right? It might be automated, it might be a recruiter, but I'll open it up and see if there's any insight on how folks can kind of get through the automated step to be able to do what you said, Remi, which is tell the story, right? How do you even get to telling the story? So if anyone would like to respond, I'll open it up here.
I will say that the way that we're looking at hiring people now. So we're starting folks on contract partially because of the way budgets are. It's been a weird year in insurance, because of COVID, actually downstream effects, but so partially budgets, but then also a contract allows us to get to know somebody without making a commitment to them right away. So I know it might not be what everyone wants to hear, but if you're having a lot of difficulty finding roles that fit what you want, reaching out to some of the different companies that do contract with places might be a good avenue. I've gotten jobs that way before, and that's what we use to kind of let you try out before we bring someone on full time. So that could be another avenue that you could look into. And then it's less of you're kind of connected to a person right away and have somebody advocating for you to get your foot in that door instead of you trying to figure out whatever automated system is reading your resume. However, although that's not necessarily everywhere, but I know it happens a lot of places.
Okay, like a Robert Half or like a Tech Systems, like
Yeah,
some.
like tech systems, Robert Half is good.
Okay.
Those are the two that I've really dealt with. I'm trying to think of more. There's one more and the name is escaping me right now.
I
We'll
think
see if
that
I can
might,
find it before we
might
all
be
leave.
a reason. I think we're starting, the UXPA NJ leadership team is starting to think about perhaps an event with some hiring managers to talk through some of this stuff. So stay tuned for more to come on that. I'll open it up to kind of any last words from all of you before we close it out. Healthcare and UX.
I mean, for your last question, I was just gonna say, reach out. I don't think it's the best solution to, people who aren't getting, through that first kind of door. But, personally, I'm not always good at it, but I try to always take meetings with folks who reach out, because if I'm not hiring, I may know someone who does. And I just think like the healthcare industry needs designers. And so um, I'm always happy to see people who are eager to get into that field. And I think like through those types of conversations, I've been able to meet folks like Mike Begley, who I like totally took a chance on. I don't know what this character's all about, but that turned out okay. Um, And I guess like I just, I wanted to say thank you guys for this opportunity to have me on this panel. And like I just said, healthcare needs help. And uh, I'm just happy to see such a large community of people who are interested.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna add to that just in this is my advice. No one else on this call, because I think everyone on this call kind of knows who I am. Be you. And if that is being aggressive in terms of like, hey, saw your LinkedIn, da 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 da, and like emailing a ton of people, getting your foot in the door, like Matt said, of like reach out to people, but also like don't be afraid of weird ways of getting in front of people. I think I sent a dude I went on a date with to Matt a few like last year or something like that, because that guy like followed up later, was like, hey, I know that we didn't like work out romantically, but you said you were in this industry and I really would like to know more about that. Could you? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I think I sent him to Matt and another design friend, Dave Resnick. And I don't know if anything came of it, but I respected the heck out of that dude for being like, hey, so put yourself in front of people and don't be afraid of that. Like, just do it. Cause like the worst they can say is no. And it's, I don't know, there's something about getting told no by a human feels better than getting told no by a computer. Cause at least a human can tell you why. And yeah, you in mind and direct toward the next person. So maybe go through people. Honestly, like again, kind of like what Remi said, of like maybe it's not the best answer, but like it is people that get you hired. And if you make a relationship and you're not forcing, if you're incentivizing that relationship, that is going to be your most statistically successful way, I think, of getting there, rather than going through some of these computers. My advice.
And I'd also say, to piggyback on one thing Frankie said, is don't be afraid to ask questions if you're unsuccessful as well. So if you do get the chance to talk to that person and you don't get the job, don't be afraid to ask for feedback and things like that. As somebody who does hire people, I'm always willing to answer those questions, because yes, we look for very specific skills. And there might just be something that you had missing, and it's usually not a fault of you. It's just a fault of what the need is. So that's another thing I'd say.
Okay, I think on that note, let's leave it. Lots of questions left unanswered, but that means, more conversations to continue. Having definitely used those LinkedIn links. I'll look at Josephine really quick just to see if there's anything else that we need to say to close out before we hang up this evening.
I'd like to thank Rutgers University and Rupa Misra for their sponsorship of this event. And I want to thank all of our panelists and Lauren for an extraordinary evening full of insights and discussion and really great opportunities to connect with other people. So thank you, everyone.